Welcome to another episode of the Hoopsfix Podcast with me, your host, Sam Nita, full-time British basketball advocate. We've got another super exciting show this week. It is none other than Aaron Radin, the recently announced CEO of the British Basketball League. There's been a lot of exciting things happening with the league over the last 12 months since obviously it took a £7 million investment from 777 Partners in the US. And Aaron is the sort of going to be the head, the face of the league moving forward. His announcement was just a week ago. Obviously has a monumental task on his hands. And so I thought it'd be good to kind of get him on and dig deep into his plans, his approach, his background, and what he's thinking about the league and how he wants to operate and how he wants to take it to the levels that we all would like to see it get to. Super interesting conversation. And clearly, you know, he is super intelligent, super smart guy. And I think I've got a lot of time for what he has to say. I think there's nothing in it really that I disagree with. So yeah, watch this space really. As always, before we get into the show, take 2 seconds to check out our Patreon account. You know, if you like what we're doing, if you want to see us continue to grow and keep doing this thing, we are looking for monthly or annual contributions for as much or as little as you would like to support the work that we're doing. You know, for the price of a cup of coffee every single month, you can help support Hoopsfix, help us keep independent and try to, you know, shine a spotlight on this British basketball thing. The other thing you might notice, I'm wearing a hoodie. It's kind of blocked by the microphone, but we have merchandise on the way. This is a Hoopsfix hoodie. We've got a whole range coming, hopefully in the spring. So I'm just putting on your radar now, hoopsfix.com/store. That will be populated with products. I'm hoping by March, we've got a whole range, tracksuits, hoodies, t-shirts, shorts, all coming. So I'm giving you a heads up on that. If there's anything particular you want to see, by all means, do let me know. As always, let me know what you think about the show and what Aaron has to say. You can either leave a comment below on YouTube if you're watching, or reach out to me on every single social media platform at Hoopsfix, or if you prefer some one-on-one interaction, you can drop me an email, sam@hoopsfix.com. I'll reply to every single one. Anyway, that is enough from me. This intro is getting a bit long-winded. Here is this week's show with the new CEO of the BBL, Aaron Radin. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you are the man of the moment, the new BBL CEO, obviously a sort of huge task ahead of you. And, you know, I really want to get into kind of what you've got on your plate and kind of how you're approaching the sort of coming months, years. But I think it sort of makes sense, giving people a little bit of context of where you're coming from and sort of your background. You know, we've seen all these big company names being mentioned in the press releases, and kind of what you've done previous to this. But I'd love to hear a little bit more detail of kind of what you've done and sort of your career trajectory up until this point.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I think is when I first learned of this opportunity, you and the media that you've produced were one of the great sources of knowledge for me in understanding what's going on in the league and in British basketball generally. So thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you do. I think that not dissimilar from you, you know, my career starts with a passion for the sport and wanting to be associated with it. So coming out of college, first job I had was working at the NBA. Actually, I had a chance to work in the legal department, working on licensing and marketing agreements. So, you know, I guess like just about everybody who worked in that department got to get yelled at by David Stern. But that was an incredible learning experience about how to build a brand, how to manage a brand, how to manage a league as a collective. And coming out of that, I've had a chance to work at many different large media companies, always in roles where we were building new businesses or starting from a relatively nascent state of building digital content businesses and figuring out how to scale them, in those cases within larger organizations. And get them to some state of maturity and figuring out how to integrate them back into the larger operations. Sandwiched in between those opportunities at Disney, CBS, NBCUniversal, I did 2 startups, one of which was my own. So, you know, it maybe took me too long in my career to figure this out, but I love building stuff, and I like to think it's what I'm best at. And honestly, I think for anybody that's sort of starting out in their careers, it's one of the things that I try and share is that it's really important to understand the phase of a business that you're interested in. Running a business that's more mature or on the backside of maturity is very different from running something at a startup phase. And through discovery, really, and the things that resonate and that I enjoy most from an experience standpoint, the building phase is the thing that's most interesting to me. The other thing that's I suppose relevant. Well, I should point out that I spent the last 4 years at Facebook, sort of now Meta. Wanted to scratch a lot of itches, I suppose. I was very interested in working in a product-led organization, working globally at massive scale, and it is massive, and working with really smart, diverse group of people. So I had a lot of fun there, learned a ton. I should say that nearly all along my entire career path, I've been involved in basketball from a grassroots standpoint. I started coaching nearly 25 years ago, and just loved it from the very beginning, got much more involved in it, helped to manage a grassroots organization in Brooklyn, New York. Have been lucky enough to coach a lot of really good players, several of whom have gone on to play in the NBA, many of which have played professionally all over the world, and hundreds of kids who have had. So Sebastian Telfair played in the program, Lance Stevenson played in the program, Chris Taft, Quincy Dubé. Boy, there's a lot of Coney Island people there, for those people who are familiar with Brooklyn.
And was this an AAU program, an AAU program in Brooklyn?
AAU program. I mean, so this is probably almost a different podcast in sort of understanding grassroots basketball in the U.S. and in New York in particular. It's interesting. We used to travel all over the place, and inevitably, no matter where we went, we'd end up playing another New York team in the semifinals or the finals, which was sort of defeated the point of why you're traveling all over the country to play different people. But yeah, we beat everyone. And the difference, I think it's interesting, and I actually think there's potential for this in British basketball. There was such depth in terms of the quality of players that you could find. Like, our first five might have been as good as the next, whoever was starting on the other team, or maybe not quite as good, but our second five would come in and just destroy the other team's bench. And particularly like we would do, we were pressing the whole game. It was fun, good times. And look, I think, so it was another way for me to express my love for the game. And in particular there, I really got an incredible source of satisfaction, probably as much as anything in my life outside of my family, from seeing these kids develop. Many of them came from quite deprived socioeconomic backgrounds. Very often they were either single or no parent households, raised by a grandparent or an aunt, an uncle, something like that. Most often they were going to be the first one in their family to go to college, and basketball was their path to get there. So I just loved that aspect of it, and the development and the relationships that I've formed along the way. So I have a real love of the game and understanding of how impactful it can be on people's lives.
So this opportunity, you obviously how did it come about? How did you first hear about it? And then sort of, the process of you coming to the decision that, yeah, I'm going to, up and move to another country and take on this monumental challenge. How did it all sort of come to be?
I decided earlier this year that I was planning to leave Meta for a variety of reasons. I think one of them was working during COVID and sitting in front of a Zoom calls all day. I couldn't distinguish. If you ask me, what were you doing in February versus July versus October? Like every day looked the same. I needed to have a break.
What was your
And
role
I
at
told my
Meta?
team,
Just quickly, what were you kind
yeah,
of overseeing at Meta? Like, what was your sort of
sure.
role and
So a
responsibilities?
couple different things. One is I managed how we structured our global our partnerships with our largest global brand clients. So Procter and Gamble, Unilever, L'Oreal. And so we had about 150 of those type of partnerships. And the other part of the business that my team worked on is really sort of how we structured our go-to-market offering for selling video advertising.
Okay.
And principally going after TV and online video spending. So the numbers at Facebook are just, take anything you've ever worked on and add, several zeros. And it's just the scale of it is just, beyond imagination. Anyway, nevertheless, I told my team, just by chance, there was a woman that was working on my team who actually had worked at the NBA previous as well in a different time tenure, who said, my brother just got involved with a team in London, and I understand that the investment group that's involved is looking for somebody to come in and help with the management of the league. Are you interested in speaking to them? So her brother is Brett Berman, who's the general manager of the London team. We had a quick chat about it. And I started to do my homework, and sort of, I suppose, how I discovered you. Because you quickly come up when searches for British basketball on Google. And, I suppose, quickly formed a perspective of how I would go about attacking this opportunity, if you will. Principally that to me, it seemed that this is a media opportunity. It's a chance to build a content business. And that, as best that I could tell, the sport was extremely popular in the country. Had not, the full commercial exploitation of it had not yet been realized. Part of that disconnect, if you want to call it that, was that there were still many opportunities to build up the content and present it to the marketplace at a much greater scale, and an opportunity to really tell the stories of the participants, whether that's the players, the coaches, the league executives, the fans, and those that are close and related to the sport, not unlike yourself. And that's an experience that I had before in my career, perhaps multiple times. And so the combination of I suppose the media building, team building, content building process, which I love, and that it's connected to basketball, which is incredibly exciting, and that it's in a marketplace which I've spent some time in and really enjoyed and would love to spend more time in, was just really attractive for me.
It's obviously a huge job, clearly there is a lot to be done. Where do you even begin? Like when, you've taken the role, you're sitting down, you're working out, I guess, immediate priorities and what your plans over the next 3 months and 6 months,
Yeah.
and a year or whatever it might be. Like, sort of, what does that process look like? And I guess what are the immediate priorities?
Sure. So yes, it is a huge job. It's funny. I was saying to my wife the other night that there was some issue or something came up, and I was sort of going through it, and she's like, "Oh, are you having fun?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm having a blast! Like, this is incredibly fun, and this is a lot of work to be done. Like, this is not straightforward and simple." So it's a very pertinent question to what my life has been like the past couple of weeks. So look, I think it goes again, starting with content. And so number one priority is to figure out how are we going to efficiently produce high quality content across all of the surfaces through which people consume. Starts with broadcast. We want to elevate the production of our broadcast to a world-class level. I'll come back to that in a little bit as to why I feel that's particularly important from a business standpoint. But from a priority standpoint, in terms of setting ourselves up, setting the team up, getting an organization in place that has the capability to produce a world-class broadcast and efficiently produce off of that all of the assets in the form factors to the various surfaces on which people consume. And so, establishing that infrastructure and then establishing a content strategy. So what is game day -3, game day -2, game day -1, day of game, pre, during, post, game day +1, game day +2? Like, what does that routine look like, if you will, from a content production standpoint? So we need to have a team and a strategy in place. We need a technical infrastructure in place. So, some of these things sound basic, but having a CMS, having a CRM, which I'll come to in a moment, are critically important. I think about understanding our audiences. So that's one of the critical aspects, both from a business to consumer and a business to business standpoint. Like, who are the constituencies that we're going after, that we want to engage, and how are we shaping the content experience of how they're experiencing our sport? That is important. I think that we're looking at, from an infrastructure standpoint, what are we doing to improve our facilities? So, as you're well aware, there are a couple of clubs in the league that own and operate their own facilities. That's Leicester and Newcastle, of course. There are 3 others with plans in motion to develop their own facilities. Caledonia, Sheffield, and Bristol all have announced plans, and so that leaves half the league still in renting facilities. And the facility is, of course, a stage, and it's also a business opportunity. So from a stage standpoint, we want something that's going to present the game in the best light, both for the in-game experience, and then, of course, for what does it look like on air. And second, from a business standpoint, we want to be able to exploit all of the opportunities that come with having people file through a gate and enjoying an experience on hand, concessions, retail, et cetera. So that is, sorting through how we can improve that across the league will be critically important. So as you can tell, like, there are big priorities. I think in terms of the way that I'm managing my own time is I'm attempting to be incredibly judicious in really focusing on next year as sort of the kicking off point, because there are tons of day-to-day issues that could occupy all of my time. And really, like, I'm really focused on how do I get the infrastructure in place to take the league to where I'm really convinced it can go to.
So I want to just loop back on what you said there. You said you're going to come back to the broadcasting and sort of what goes into that. So, you're starting with trying to produce a world-class broadcast. Can you kind of expand on that? What does it mean? What does it look like? What should people be looking for when that starts to get executed on?
Sure. So a couple things. One is, I think the quality of our broadcast has improved significantly this year, and there's still room to grow. I think a couple of things. One is just infrastructure alone. More cameras at a game creates more access, right? So that's one. More high quality cameras at a game creates more and better access. So those are some let's call them relatively obvious elements of the telecast.
How many number of cameras would you be working towards?
I wouldn't be able to give you a number now, because I think that that's going to require some level of trial and error in terms of how we can efficiently produce what we all agree is sort of a product that is worthy and comparable of being compared to some of the best telecasts in the world. The Sky games today are run off of 6 or 7 cameras, or the Euro Cup games are off of 7 cameras. We're using 3 cameras for the games that are produced with a partner called Brandbox today. It's certainly more than 3. Could we do it with 6 or 7? Maybe. I think, to some degree, it becomes a direction question, how we integrate highlights. I think one of the key elements of having a great broadcast, of course, is that the pictures are telling the stories, but also that the commentators are telling the stories. And by that, I mean that they're not only narrating what's occurring on the court and providing insight, particularly for this audience, which may not be as familiar with the sport, about what is occurring from a color commentary standpoint, but also telling the stories of the participants. Where did Larry Austin come from, and how did he end up in the BBL? What is the story of Kareem Queally, like in his background as a British basketball player, playing academy and going to Spain in order to develop his career? Telling the story of the coaches, of the teams themselves. So I want to get to a point where that's being woven into our telecasts on a much greater basis, where those stories begin to resonate and create emotive connections with our audience, so that they either strongly root for or even rooting against players, because ultimately what we're trying to do is tap into that passion. And I think one of the principal ways to do that is, of course, not only be excited by the action, but also to identify with the participants.
Clearly, when you talk about sort of increasing the infrastructure and having more cameras at games, it's going to require a lot of staff, which means requiring a lot more capital. When we talk about sort of investment coming into the league, obviously 777, the initial investment last year was 7 million. I saw an interview in Front Office Sports the other day where I can't remember even who it was with, but he was saying that he expects their investment to get into the hundreds of millions, which I thought was pretty interesting. What do you see as the sort of I guess what's going to happen from an investment standpoint? How much money do you think needs to be raised to really get this to the level and scale that you're aspiring to get it to?
Yep. I couldn't give you a number today. I'm literally in the process of building a budget now. As you rightly point out, and as I've declared here, like, this is going to take more resources, and I have every indication that more resources will be provided in order to support this, within reason, of course. Like, there's got to be a path to generate a business return. And that's the full intention. I think that, even going back to some of your earlier questions, Sam, and thinking about the business, the reason focusing on the content business is critically important is it creates opportunities for us to create opportunities for brands. And by that, I mean, we have more ways for brand partnerships to more surfaces, if you will, more impressions, if you will, that are going to come from creating more audience and richer presentation of the sport. And so I'm incredibly optimistic of what this business can be, and know that in order for it to realize it, we're going to have to make that investment in developing a much richer content product, which, of course, as you point out, is going to require more resourcing. Hopefully it's been clear, but perhaps implied in my comments, but I'll make it more express, which is, and we need to focus on doing that as efficiently as possible. So when you think about workflow of creating assets And, not to get sort of too in the weeds here, but that is critically important, from producing a broadcast, being able to come out of a broadcast and pull all of the highlights, for example, making sure they're going to the right platforms with the right commentary, with the right form factor. That workflow, those processes are critically important, because you can, of course, get overbound in process if you don't design it correctly from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, even coming into this season, the deal was signed with WSC, which clearly just makes such a difference to the amount of content that the league can now produce.
Yes.
Because having that automated platform that, after a game within 10 minutes, you've got condensed highlights, you've got highlights of specific players, you've got breakdown of the top rated players, plays. So I guess you're kind of looking to systemize processes like that to be able to be as efficient as possible.
Absolutely. And in fact, technology has played a huge role in making this more efficient. I was involved in sort of linear television sports production going back 25 years. You used to roll a huge truck to deliver on site. Today, you can produce a sport. You could produce it right from where you're sitting with a set of software and a microphone and a fiber line going into your apartment, or flat, I should say. And so that's not how we are intending to produce. We're not going to be doing it out of my flat. But we do intend to try and centralize production as much as possible, because there's a lot of efficiency to be realized in doing so. And the tools are available to help do that, as you rightly pointed out.
Is the ambition, from a monetization perspective, is the ambition to get it to a place that you can get a major TV deal? We've obviously sort of charted the progress of the Australian NBL, and they signed this massive deal with ESPN last year, worth in the tens of millions, which is kind of, I think, where they're aspiring to get to. Is that when you see, the league shareholders getting a return on their investment, or starting getting to a place where you're not losing money hand over fist? Is TV a massive part of it, or do you see other routes?
Yes. TV is a part of it. I think that we absolutely want to develop multiple revenue streams. Look, I think part of the attraction of this role at this moment in time is what's going on in the television landscape and the way that people are consuming content, and what's going on from an investment standpoint. So if you look at the stock performance of Netflix, Disney, in fact, Disney turning over its CEO, going back to Bob Iger, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Comcast, and what's occurred over the last year, where acquiring audience was paramount, and Wall Street was rewarding that, to now profitability is rewarded. So we have a couple of things going for us actually more than a couple of things going for us that fit right in with what's going on in the marketplace generally. One, we have a live sports product. We produce ballpark 20 hours of live content per week. There is incredible demand for live sports in the marketplace, as reflected by all sorts of rights deals all around the globe. Two, and in particular for our sport is skewing particularly young. When we look at the viewer demographic data, 70% of our audience is between the ages of 13 to 34. If you speak to anybody in the broadcast space, whether for the traditional sort of drama comedy programming, or even for a good deal of their sports programming, you're looking at an average median age of 55 plus in terms of the audience range. And the networks want to get younger because advertisers want to be able to attract younger consumers. And third is on a relative cost basis to what it costs to produce or procure an hour of programming, we are going to be relatively cheap. And so at least for the short term, I hope to be expensive one day. So look, I think we have a very strong value proposition. Of course, like the broadcast quality needs to meet the market need. And so, you know, I think that there's a match to be made. I think that, if you think about the revenue streams related to this business, having that distribution and scale of distribution will lead to advertising or sponsorship opportunities. And, that can range anything from, the sponsorship of particular events all the way down to just running, standard what are called spots and dots on air during a game, or on our website, owned and operated properties. There is, I think, an extraordinary opportunity with branded content. I think that there are a lot of communities or audiences that we can target and develop authentic content to connect with them and integrate brands into that opportunity, so that you begin to build the brand equity with those audiences. And all of these things, I believe, can lead to building a bigger economy for the sport of basketball in this marketplace. And in that respect, it creates all sorts of ancillary opportunities for the participants. I look at an opportunity of partnering with somebody like yourself, and there's others in the marketplace that are involved in producing media content and producing basketball as an event, as a business. And we want to partner with folks like yourself in order to facilitate creating a bigger economy. Because the more fans that we have of the sport, the more approachable the sport is, the easier it is for fans to engage in and with it, the more opportunities there will be to partner with businesses that want to connect with those audiences. So that's a really exciting prospect for us. And then a related area is in licensing. And so leveraging the IP that's been created in this league, the marks of the teams, to hopefully build demand where people want to be consuming our products. It's buying a basketball with a Leicester Riders logo, to wearing a Sheffield Sharks jersey, to and showing up at games with that equipment, or showing up at amongst their friends. I think that there's an opportunity prospectively to build a lifestyle brand and have an association of basketball being cool and the thing to do and the thing to be associated with. And one way to realize that is through licensed products. So we think there's a really interesting opportunity there as well.
There was one figure that I actually wanted to ask you about, because I heard you quote it in the BBL interview as well, which is the 70% of your audience is 13 to 34. Mm-hmm. Where is that data from? Is that from your own internal analytics, or is it from, I don't know, consultancy research that you've done? Like, for me, I feel like the BBL audience either is super young, as in children that go with parents, or it's mm-hmm. much older. And I feel that, I mean, we from a Hoopsfix perspective, we found historically our audience definitely does skew younger, 13 to 24. And mm-hmm. when we put out content BBL related, it tends to really struggle. And I've always found it hasn't quite connected with that young audience. So it surprises me to hear that that's the figure that you've got. So I'll be interested to hear kind of where you get it from.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasant surprise for me as well. So those numbers are coming straight off of the YouTube live streams. Okay. And people that are watching those games. So, of course, there you have a registered audience. Yeah, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. I think you actually highlighted one thing that I've noticed as well. So there's the numbers we have of who's viewing the games online. And then there's what you see when you go into an arena to watch a BBL game. And, what I see are a lot of families with young children. anecdotally, when I speak to people in the crowds, it's often the first time that they've been to a game before. It's sort of an attractive night out option, if you will. Perhaps less to do with the fandom related to basketball. That's both a challenge, I suppose, and an opportunity. It's great that it's a family friendly product. That people feel comfortable bringing their families to the events and are having an enjoyable time. It's great to get that cross section of different age groups involved. And I think from my perspective, obviously I want to have as diverse an audience as possible. I'm not suggesting in any way that, we're only programming for 13 to 34-year-olds. We want to appeal to all types of people. From all types of backgrounds. But there is, an interesting dichotomy, I suppose, in what we've seen in the data and what you sort of see when you actually look at a crowd at a game. So it's something that we'll continue to focus on and respond to as more data comes in.
Do you see the content as trying to be a driver to get a different audience potentially, or bigger audiences, I guess, to games? I mean, I don't even know what the average BBL attendance figures are across the league, but I would guess that they're not more than 1,500-ish to 2,000 something as an average across the entire league. How do you see the balance between the content and then, it's the content and the product, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So. Many of our teams sell out most, if not all, of their games. So that's a good thing. It sort of demonstrates that there's more capacity in their marketplaces, which sort of goes to my point before about arenas. So from a content strategy standpoint, you're identifying, one of the key issues for us going forward, which is programming for the masses and programming to specific audiences. And it's actually one of the things that we're going to have to get good at both. One is we need to have a product that's approachable for everyone. That's generally going to be the broadcast. There may be other examples of that, the website, for example. And we want to build content that might be more focused, or perhaps a better way to put it is will resonate better for different audience subsegments. So, and I'm giving you an example. I'm not suggesting that this is necessarily the audience that we are going after, but if we were going to program towards urban youth, what would that content look like versus what does it look like, to produce content just for our website? And how are we going to reach that audience? Is the website the best way to do it? Is the telecast the best way to do it? Is social, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snap the best way to reach those audiences? So we're going to need to employ all of those strategies in order to facilitate the engagement of all these different audiences.
What does I think it's important for people to know kind of where the league is at from a staffing perspective right now. We've seen there's been a couple of hires previous to you. There's obviously a head of marketing now with Joe Edwards, and there's a head of broadcast with Manny Gill. Are there any other sort of hires that have happened? And I guess, what are you working towards? When you talk about the size of the league staff, what would you want it to be? And what would it look like?
So yes, those folks have recently joined the group, and they're great additions to the team. I think they've already had major impact in the product that's being put out. So as I mentioned before, I'm in process of putting together what that plan ultimately looks like. I couldn't give you a number today. I can tell you that building a content team will absolutely be critical. There is an open role today to run content at the BBL. And that person will be responsible for evolving the strategy that I've described here and putting their team together. I think from a content production standpoint, we are going to explore having the teams have their own content teams. and or managing it on a centralized basis. I think it could end up being a hybrid. It's still in an exploration process of doing that. For the broadcast itself, as you know, in broadcast, like you have somewhat of a centralized organization and then employ a number of freelancers on a game-to-game basis for production. I wouldn't expect that we do anything significantly different here. Like, we're not reinventing the wheel from a broadcast perspective. We're, in fact, mirroring what a lot of other organizations have already done. I expect that, excuse me, that we'll need some people to focus on our licensing and commerce business in terms of not only identifying opportunities there, but prospectively carving out a bigger position for us in a retail environment, whether that's traditional bricks and mortar retailers or digital. And when I tour around and go to various retail outlets today, if I go to a JD Sports, a Foot Locker, or so on, there's very little, if any, footprint in those stores for basketball-related items. I look at that as an opportunity to carve out space, not perhaps with those retailers, perhaps with others. So we need somebody to focus on that and identifying good licensing partners who can help produce high-quality products and perhaps may have retail relationships. And then, of course, we need a commercial organization that's going to connect with the B2B community and be able to help facilitate them meeting their goals and leveraging the BBL as a way to do so.
So how many staff are employed by the league right now?
So the league staff today is, we're looking at 9-10 people. So it's a small group.
How, obviously I know you can't give a specific figure, but if it's all roundabouts, if we were to have this conversation in 6 months, 12 months, are you hoping for it to get to 50? Are you thinking it's going to be 20? Kind of what are roundabout figures of how much bigger you're going to build the team?
It's less than 1,000. And more than it is presently. Look, I think having done operations like this, you never actually grow as fast as you think you will.
Right.
It's hard to hire people. It's hard to hire good people. One good hire is worth way more than 5 mediocre hires. I'd rather hire one good person. So I don't know that I have a specific number in mind as much as, but I do want to rapidly get a core team in place.
Right.
And so, I've identified some of those key hires. I think that in many ways, I'm going to rely on them to identify what the needs are in order to meet our goals. So, it's certainly less than 100. Is it less than 50 a year from now? Probably. But we'll see. There's still work to be done, so I couldn't be prescriptive about it at this moment.
Gotcha. And then from an organization perspective, with you and your role, I assume you'll be reporting to the board and the other owners.
Correct.
Who are you accountable to, and how will that work exactly? If the franchises are not happy with you, what happens?
Sure. So there's a board of directors. This is all sort of publicly available, I suppose, information.
Yep.
The board is constructed of the investors, principally 777 at the moment. There are 2 club representatives, and there are slots for 4 independents on the board. So that's the construct of the board, and that's who I report to.
So a question that has been raised ever since 777 have come in is this conflict of interest question. As a franchise owner, as well as now, clearly having a big say in how the league is operating and what the league is going to be doing moving forward. Do you see that as a potential issue, or do you think there are no conflicts there?
I don't know that that's necessarily a question for me to answer directly. I suppose that our interests are all aligned at the moment. I think the conflict of interest, if I'm understanding you correctly, that you're pointing out to, could be a competitive imbalance issue. And, to some degree, it's related to the business, to running the business, and to a large degree, it's not related to running of the business. What I'm focused on principally is developing the infrastructure of the business. I think that I don't perceive it as a conflict of interest. If I did, and if I thought it was a significant issue, I'd probably be reticent to even sign up for the role. I think that everybody is aligned in building the growth. Going back to my comments before, of the marketplace for the sport in this marketplace. Are there going to be divergent opinions? Of course. Of how to go about it? Absolutely. Luckily for me, at least one opinion that they converged on is that I'm qualified and that I should be involved in helping to do so. But look, I think that I haven't seen any indication to date that it's going to be a challenge for us going forward.
On the topic of franchises, how many franchises do you think realistically the UK should be able to support? How many would you like to see when we're talking about the growth of the league?
Yep. Sure. So it's more than what we have today. I don't know exactly what that number is. I think that it's a bit premature at this moment in time to discuss what it would be, because of all of the infrastructure elements that need to be put in place to put us in a solid foundational position to add additional franchises to the mix. I think that both, not only for what other prospective investors / owners would bring, but also for the existing ownership and investor base, and realizing what should be the full value of an incremental franchise fee to the league. So we want to be on, I suppose, more solid, broader footing. I'll preempt you here because it may be your next question about putting another team in London, which I think could absolutely be in play, but all of the same things that I mentioned before would need to be in place before we would consider doing so. Another team in London, a team in Birmingham. Pick another marketplace, Leeds. All of those prospectively could be in play, but again, we want to have a more solid foundational structure before we start exploring that more aggressively.
So do you think we won't be seeing any new franchises anytime soon?
I suppose it depends on what your definition of anytime soon is.
Well, I guess
Will it
next
be next
season?
I would not expect to see that next season.
Right. Okay. When you talk about what you envision the sort of the biggest drivers of revenue being for the business, where do you if you were to try to, I guess, give us estimates of how you see the pie being broken up between the different pots, where do you think the money is going to come from?
Well, I outlined it before. I don't know that I could give you a specific breakdown of how those buckets are, what percentage those buckets are going to contribute yet. In sport, of course, there is precedent, right? If you look at any of the major leagues around the world, the NBA, the NFL, Premier League, a great deal of their revenue is driven from broadcast. We are starting from a relatively low base in that respect. And so, I would expect for some period of time, the other sources of revenue will contribute on a greater basis. But as we grow the marketplace, I think there's an opportunity for us to prospectively have a distribution not unlike some of the other major leagues in the world. But we have work to do to get there.
On the focus of sort of players, I guess there's a couple of things I want to touch upon. Like one, how do you see that balance between providing opportunities for British players being a core part of the league and faces of the league, but then also bringing in elite talent, import talent, which of course has got a number of benefits. You're raising the level and you've got people come to see great basketball players and want to see good basketball. But then also the transient nature of that, historically, we'll get import players in that will come for 1 year and then disappear. And then from a point of trying to build that connection with the fan base, it's very hard to do. Like, kind of how are you approaching that and sort of the balance between British and American talent?
Yep, it's a great question. So, look, one of the principal goals of the league is to develop British talent, hard stop. And so, not only within the league structure itself, but also with all of the organizations that are involved in helping to develop the talent in this market. So, from grassroots to Team GB, we want to play a role in helping to facilitate the development and ideally keeping them in market to play in our league. That's enormously important. I think one of the points that you made, I'll try and make it even more express, is we absolutely feel that there's value from a brand perspective, from a business perspective, for the audience to identify and root for homegrown players. That's a key benefit for the business. Like, certainly, theoretically, we could import all the players and maybe the product gets better, maybe it doesn't, but it wouldn't resonate as much with the local market. And we want to create that resonance. That's critically important. And we want them to stick around for exactly the points that you made before, which is, you create that identification and affiliation, fandom, if you will, of those players, and have an opportunity to create a long-term connection with them. So it's critically important. And it's also critically important to test them against the best that the world has to offer. So it's, to have players come in from around the world that will challenge and play at the highest level possible is what we want for the league. So, I couldn't tell you whether we have the exact right mix today or it needs to be tweaked one way or the other. I think the principles would stay the same. But it is critically important that the British talent is given all of the nurturing, if you will, air, sunlight, water, to grow. And, I'm optimistic that there is the appetite to do so. There's clearly evidence that world-class talent can be developed in this marketplace. I mean, just look at what Jeremy Sohan is doing this year as somebody who grew up in this market. And, even beyond that, ideally, we're giving them reasons to represent this market on a global level. So, it's a critical part of the league's success going forward, because it would be very difficult to create that resonance without high quality homegrown talent.
What are your thoughts on like developing fandom and how you develop real fans? I think that with British basketball, we've struggled. We can get bums on seats, but actually creating that fandom where people really are invested in the success or failure of their team and knowing the players and knowing the backstories. I'd love to kind of hear how you would approach that, what your thoughts are around it. And then I think there's a phrase you've obviously said to me, which is hope and memory. And I'd love to kind of hear you riff on that a little bit as well.
Sure. Look, it's amongst the biggest challenges we have. And it's a big reason why I'm so focused on the storytelling, because that's a way to create that emotive connection with the player, the coach, the team. And in some ways, I think it's a good segue to you referencing this hope and memory notion. And just, for your listeners, and again, this is not my original concept. I think I first heard about this. There's a sports writer called Mike Lupica. He's very famous in the U.S. for many years, columnist, said that sports is really about hope and memory. And by that, he meant that there's sort of two very specific elements of fandom. One is, creating hope is what is the ambition for your team, your favorite player. And there's a whole business around creating hope in the sports marketplace, right? The signing, when a player is signed, why is that player signed? What is the narrative related to that player signing? How is he going to help your team achieve its next goal? How is that going to be good for the player? You look at someone like Fabrizio Romano, who's created an enormous following in covering football transfers. And, you wonder, why is that? And I think it goes back to this hope factor, because people are really interested in what is that next thing going to be, because then what is it going to mean? And there's a whole cottage industry, if you will, of sports talk that's related to hope, creating topics of discussion. Should this person, be on the all-star team? Is this a better player? Is this player a better fit than the other for the team? So that's one aspect. So I think we've got a path to begin to have that be resonant for our fans, and it's a way to create fandom. The memory piece is really about the nostalgia that comes with sports. And, the World Cup is going on now. Everyone talks about England winning the World Cup in 1966, even though most of the people that are talking about it weren't even alive. Like, it's a resonant moment in the history of the country that's related to sports. There are plenty of others. And so, when you see a highlight over and over again of a particular moment that occurred in sports history, it's, David Beckham scoring from midfield, that you've seen the highlight play over and over and over again. And there's something that's resonant about that. It's like it's a nostalgia. It's almost like a comfort food in some ways, that, people begin to identify with those moments in their lives. They connect them to moments in their lives when those things happened. There is memory that exists in the BBL. It's not as widely known as I would hope it would be. And I look at that as an opportunity to tell some of those stories and hopefully begin to create some memories of things that occurred in the past. But certainly going forward, it's something that we're going to attempt to do as well, is sort of create that resonance. Those to me are the principal elements of developing fandom. I think for me, coming from the U.S., going to football games here, I would analogize it to, it's like going to, in some ways it's a cult, in some ways it's sort of a religious experience. There's such a ritualism about going to these football matches, and for many of the people there, it's sort of passed down through generations. Like, you are, it's in your blood, who you're associated with. I think that's really unique, and that's a difficult point of comparison for what we can achieve. Doesn't mean that we can't achieve deep fandom. Will it be as tribalistic as you see in football today? Next year? Probably not. 5 years? Still probably not. 10 years from now? Maybe. That it's possible. Because, the behavior in the marketplace has suggested that it is possible. In fact, it's demonstrated that it's possible. You just need to create enough of those resonance points for it to land in that manner.
100%. I always, sometimes I'm like, when I watch British fans at basketball games, I'm always like, oh, they're so quiet and they're so reserved. I'm like, maybe it's just not in our nature, like culturally, to do those things. Then I'm like, well, actually, no, because if you go to a football game, it's the complete opposite. So clearly, within British culture, it's possible. You just obviously have to get to a place where you kind of develop that. It was actually fascinating.
Well,
go on. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, Sam. So I don't know if you've seen that at the Lions game, that sort of this organic fan group has evolved.
Yeah.
That's growing over time. Ironically, it's actually a colleague of mine. His nephew is the leader of the group. That's just totally random. But that's sort of like the kind of organic enthusiasm that's clearly being demonstrated as possible, albeit on a relatively small scale today, but certainly could grow.
Yeah.
So it's there, and as you say, the culture is there of singing the songs and so on. I think one of the things for me, like if I go to a football match, everybody's watching. I don't want to suggest that they're not watching the match, but that's like a part of the experience. It's not the whole experience. A lot of the experience is just going and singing the songs and having the camaraderie of being with their colleagues. And so I'd love to have both. I want them, engaged in the match, of course. But it's an interesting dichotomy in terms of, what fandom looks like.
I'm aware of time, but there's just one more thing I really want to touch upon is sort of the disparity between certain franchises, budgets, operational staff, all of that kind of stuff. That has clearly been a big issue in the past. How are you approaching that, and how, I guess, can you help the smaller budget franchises, smaller teams, I guess, level up to try to get the league a great level of parity?
Sure thing. So, I'm not being defensive at the first part of this answer. I'm just pointing out sort of the obvious, which is this exists across all leagues, right? Like it's not uncommon that a large differentiator in sport is budget. And it happens in all leagues around the world, certainly here in the Premier League for sure. Second is, my role is to elevate the business of the league. In order to do that, I've got to elevate the audience of the league. And part of elevating the business of the league is creating, and I referenced it before, perhaps not clearly enough, is by centralizing a lot of the league's business. So let me take a step back. I think of the construct of the league business in sort of two components. There's what I'll call a national part of the business, and a local part of the business. So on a national level, we're going to be focused on things like broadcasting rights, licensing, national sponsorships. At a local level, you're looking at local exploitation, so local business opportunities, local partnerships, local sponsors, if you will. Those are both, those are obviously two forms of revenue. Depending on who that local participant is, and by local participant, I mean a particular club in a particular market, the size of their market is going to dictate to some degree their opportunity, right? So London is going to have a bigger opportunity just as a function of the scale of the city of London. That being said, I would imagine it's I don't know if I'd say it's a goal, but I would imagine that with the strategy that we're putting forward, that the vast lion's share of the revenue, and that's not an intended pun, are coming from national sources. And the national sources will be distributed equitably amongst the clubs. It's a long way of saying that when you generate revenue at a central level and distribute it to the stakeholders equally, they will have, at least from that portion, of their resources, equal budgets or equal funds to invest into the product on the court. Again, local might be different. They might have other sources of budgets in terms of what they're willing to put into the business. But my goal is to generate as much of a distribution for all of the clubs as possible so that they can invest back into the sport.
So if the league signed let's just say a 20 million deal with the ESPN, for example, what is the split between what the league would get and then what would be distributed amongst the franchises?
After you take out so after costs,
yeah, of course,
it would get distributed it would act as a dividend.
Right. Okay. Cool. And then finally,
I think, the board has to be aligned in terms of what reinvestment strategy looks like overall, right? So, and that's the cost component. Gotcha. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, finally, how are you going to measure your success? What does success look like? Let's say within 12 months from now, what are you expecting from yourself and the league, and how will you measure it?
Sure. So it's a great question. I think it's actually a work in progress. Is what are the key KPIs for this league going forward? Some of them are qualitative and some of them are quantitative, right? So we're already tracking consumption, or to put it in a better way, we're setting up the infrastructure to track consumption against a variety of different metrics. And so obviously we want to be tracked up and to the right. And we're going to test, on an iterative basis, what things are working, what things aren't working, and make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to adjust based on what those metrics look like. For me, the key goal going into next season is we are set up with an infrastructure to allow us the opportunity to be successful. In order to do that, it's having a good broadcast product, having good distribution, building a team for all the roles that I mentioned before, and allowing them the time and space to put into place their own teams and their own strategies to execute against what I've described here. That would position us to have a more than a fighting chance of success. I mean, ultimately, we want to produce a great product that people enjoy, and get out of the way for the large part. Just allow them to enjoy it. And if that occurs, I'm very confident that we'll have a good business that will continue to support making it even better.
Perfect. That is a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And I wish you all the best with the task ahead of you. I look forward to following and hopefully see the continued growth of the BBL.
Sam, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time.